So welcome everyone. This special event. This talk tonight is part of a ongoing program at Princeton, Reimagining World Order, which is a intellectual community or research community, part of the PIIRS institution at Princeton. So we're very happy to have Professor Jia Qingguo here from Peking University. He is the former dean of the School of International Affairs at Peking University. He has a very distinguished career that he brings to the table tonight. He was educated at Cornell University, and he's held teaching positions at Cornell, at the University of California, San Diego, other universities here at FAR. He's been a visiting fellow at Brookings. He holds multiple positions of leadership in associations in China, international studies associations. And so he has been very active, in some ways, both bringing Western IR theories to China and bringing China to Western IR. And that has been one of his specialties. He has written widely in books and articles on US-China relations between China and mainland, Taiwan, and Chinese foreign policy. I think he'll blend a few of those in his talk today. I just mentioned one last thing. Jia Qingguo has been a dear friend, I would say, over the last decade or more, and me for 13 years, I think it is. Our two universities, Princeton and Peking University, along with University of Tokyo, Korea University, and National University of Singapore, the 5 universities have been a networked group. And we meet every year, the second weekend in December. And every year we bring our delegations together at one place or the other to talk about East Asian security, conflict, and cooperation. The one observation we always make is that every year things seem to get worse. And so maybe a spurious correlation, but it seems like maybe we should stop meeting and send in chaos. But in any case, we're very happy to have you here for a talk. Professor Jia will speak for about 40 minutes, and then it will be opened up. There is an online group, so welcome for those of you online. And once again, thank you and welcome to Princeton, and the floor is yours.
Hey. Thank you very much, John. It's a great honor and privilege to come here. Actually, the 5 universities' value, the workshop value is to make worse things from happening. Rather than to improve the situation. So I think we did great things. After many years of meeting, I think participants, when we sit down, we talk about real issues. No diplomatic, rhetoric, nor emotional, kind of exchanges, but we try to keep realistic and pragmatic in our discussions. So I think that's a great value for all of our 5 countries. Well, today's topic is one that John and I have been talking about in the 5 university workshop. Actually, but here are my views about this breakdown of the post-war international order. I think this order is being weakened, undermined, but it is still there. In recent years, we see a lot of things happening, quite a few disturbing developments. That's Russo-Ukraine War, North Korea, missile crisis, missile tests, Pelosi's visit to Taiwan, the hardening of military alliances between the US and its allies, and suspension of China-US climate change policy. All these things appear to be independent, having their own respective origin. But on one front, that is, they are all linked. That is, they are all some kind of a challenge and also a reflection of the existing international system. It's becoming weaker, and that to some extent let these kind of things happen. So in my talk, I will first try to explain why I think these developments are not isolated and how they are related to the weakening of the existing international order. Then I'll try to outline what I see as the major factors influencing this development. Okay. And finally, I'll try to come up with some thoughts as to what we can do to about this situation, or as the international community, what we should do. Well, the disturbing events mentioned above are all symptoms of weakening international order. The Russo-Ukraine War, what Russia did was a challenge to the principle of territorial integrity and that of non-use of force in resolving international disputes. No country has the right to encourage people of another country to separate where they live, okay, to become independent from their mother country. This is a principle that China has held on to for a long time, especially on the Taiwan issue. And it is enshrined in the UN Charter. North Korea's missile tests and nuclear weapon program. What the North Korea did, has been done, is poses a challenge to another part of the international order, that is non-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. The logic is, the more countries have nuclear weapons, the more likely they end up in a nuclear war. That's why we have this NPT, and also ban on test of nuclear weapons and other treaties. Pelosi's visit to Taiwan actually is part of this congressional efforts to support the Taiwan Authority. That posed a problem also to the international order. That is, you should not encourage people of a certain country to become independent because that would lead to war and confrontation. That may not even serve the interest of the country you want to encourage, or of the place you want to help. And US efforts at boosting existing international military alliances, such actions appear to be self-defensive and is rational on the part of the Americans and probably also some of US allies. But they pose a challenge also to the existing international order. Why? Because they separate countries into we and them. For those countries who are not included, they become suspicious and maybe even hostile in the long run. So all these developments in their various ways reflect the weakening of the existing international order. They pose a challenge to the existing international order, and also they reflect a weakening of the international order. That process has been going on for some time. I mean, the weakening of the international order has been going on for some time. And as a result, the international order has become both much less liberal and much less stable. And such a trend of development poses an increasing threat to international peace, stability, and prosperity. How do we explain the breakdown of the existing international order? I think there are quite a few factors involved. One is the decline of the West. A lot of people don't want to acknowledge, but it's happening in hard power, at least. Statistics show that the share of the world's GDP, gross domestic product of Group 7, the G7 countries, the US, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, and the United Kingdom, dropped from 68% in 1992 to 30.15% in 2018, and is projected to go down to 27.26% in 2023, next year. Although the decline in military capabilities is less dramatic, the NATO defense spending has also shrunk from that of 2/3 of the world's defense spending to a little more than half in 2017. Maybe it's smaller now. The second factor is the rise of the East. Associated with this, according to IMF statistics, the BRICS countries' share of the world's GDP reached 23.2% by 2018. And barring from some major mishaps, it will reach 50% by the year 2030, according to the projections a couple of years ago. Also, with the economic growth, these countries' military spending has also grown rapidly. In 2019, 3 out of the top 10 military spenders are BRIC countries. And Brazil ranked the 11th, and that means 4 countries from the BRICS out of the 11 top military spenders. Consequently, the political influence of the BRIC countries have also grown substantially. The decline of the West has made it increasingly difficult for the West to impose its liberal interpretation of the international order. Whereas the rise of the East has provided less reason for the rising powers to take orders from the West against their own interests, and more reasons for them to assert their own views on world affairs. So that's one of the major reasons for the decline of the existing international order. Less capabilities on the part of the West to enforce its will and defend the old order, and more challenges from the East, especially where their interests are not accommodated. The second reason is the rise of nationalism and populism symbolized by the election of Donald Trump and Brexit. This has led to official actions on the part of major countries to reverse globalization. Pulling their countries out of major international organizations, like what Trump administration did. Like the US withdrew from TPP, UNESCO, Compact for Migration, the Human Rights Council of the UN, Paris Agreement, WHO, etc. And also, Trump administration launched trade war, not just against China, but also against US major trading partners. The decline of, the third factor is the decline of US soft power and willingness to take up international leadership. Trump's trade war against US major trading partners and other unilateral policies have contributed to the decline of US soft power. And also, Biden administration's decision to withdraw from Afghanistan of the way it went. Also, to stay out of the CPTPP, and also to strengthen the alliances at the expense of more universally represented international mechanisms, also helped to, sort of contributed to this decline of US soft power, and also the willingness of the US to take up the leadership to defend the international order. And finally, the deterioration of US-China relations and the rising tension between these two countries have also contributed to the decline of the existing international order. It's unfortunate that these two countries have become, if not enemies, at least quasi-enemies. Within a very short period of time, the relationship fell from partnership to adversarial type relationship. Really unfortunate. They are supposed to be stakeholders. They are supposed to help each other in showing up this international order. But instead of doing that, they are trying to undermine each other. That, to some extent, also made the international order less defend on its own. So some countries have been taking advantage of this in the pursuit of their own national interests or their perceived national interests. So what is likely to happen in the future? I think this trend is going to continue, at least in the short run. In other words, the international order is likely to be even weaker, more fragile. First, the change in balance of power is continuing, even though at a slower pace. And second, populism and nationalism is still rampant and it's likely to remain rampant, not only in this country, but also in other countries, also in China. You have people who think of the worst of other countries and try to fan up anti-foreign, anti-globalization feelings. And also, politicians are going to take advantage of this kind of situation. Despite that their actions may generate hostility and confrontation, which is quite immoral, even in their rhetoric. I'm often impressed by the amount of time and energy US Congress has been spending on Taiwan. There are quite a few dozen pieces of draft legislation in the process. They are spending a lot of time deliberating this. And there's some congressmen, increasing number of congressmen, are spending time to go to Taiwan. Why do they want to do this? American society, American economy, American politics, there are so many things to do. But they choose to spend a lot of time doing this. China forces that extremely on that. And we, during Pelosi's visit, we were worried that there would be a crisis. But what's the point? I think of course, they are worried about what's going to happen to Taiwan. They are thinking in ideological terms, democracy and that sort of thing. But they are not. Probably they should also worry about the consequence of these actions, creating more hostility and confrontation between China and the US, may even cause military conflict in the Taiwan Strait. And these probably make whatever moral and morally appealing arguments, pale. Despite President Biden's efforts to repair the damage of his predecessor, the US world leadership focuses more on cooperation with allies to ward off the so-called China threat than with cooperation that includes China to address various global challenges, ranging from climate change to non-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. It's interesting that, China is still a stakeholder of the existing international order. Instead of trying to seek China's help to deal with various kinds of global challenges, like climate change. I'm really surprised that the weather is so warm here today, these days. Other people also say that this is quite unusual. I was in Ithaca a few days ago. The weather there was pretty warm. And also in Beijing, in other places. This is a big challenge. China is worried about it. US is worried about it. Other countries are worried about it. Probably we should spend more attention to deal with these problems like this instead of squandering our resources at each other in confrontation. And also, given recent development in the US and in China, like midterm election in the US and 20-party Congress in China, it seems to me chances for the relationship to improve is likely to be smaller in the days to come. So, yeah, the picture is quite pessimistic. I'm sorry, I have to report the bad news. What should be done? I think all this is bad news for the world. Despite all its flaws, the current international order is still the best one humankind has ever created. Under this order, the universally accepted values and principles such as sovereignty, non-aggression, non-intervention in other countries' internal affairs, human rights, rule of law, free trade, and the principle of both common and differentiated responsibility are accepted and defended. So this order has some value, and they are universally accepted, even though in practice they different countries may differ. Also, states observe international laws and norms in general. We complain about each other country for breaking the rules. Just like lawyers complain about these, on behalf of his clients about the other companies for not doing a good job. But in general, countries behave according to the rules and norms under this order. And states, big or small, have opportunities to air their frustration with world affairs, especially at the UN and other international platforms. All countries have a voice, even though there are differences, of course, but they can air their complaints in this order. And they can discuss ways and means to address the pressing global issues. And in part because of this international order, another world war has been averted so far. And unprecedented prosperity in human history has been attained. And this explains why very few countries have completely rejected the international order, regardless of whatever grudges they may have with it. Confronted with this, the international community has to do something about the trend of development, which is very unpleasant. Personally, I believe it's time for the international community to work together to defend the international order in the spirit of goodwill, tolerance, and pragmatism. First, I think we should all try to adapt to the changing realities and become more tolerant and inclusive. The voice of the non-Western world should be given more attention, and more efforts should be made to involve them in deliberation and rulemaking, so that they have as much a stake in the system as other countries, and has as much interest to support and defend the system, defend the order as other countries. Second, we should try to avoid ideologicalized or politicalized issues when we engage in international cooperation. Why? Because when you make issues ideological or an identity thing, there is no room for compromise. We have to be pragmatic in dealing with each other. Ideologues, they cannot compromise. Nothing gets done. We end up in hostility and confrontation and even war. So we have to be pragmatic in dealing with issues. There are real threats and problems demanding pragmatic solutions now. Like on the issues of non-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, it is not about ideology. It's about objective calculation. The more countries with nuclear weapons, the more likely we end up in the war, in the nuclear war. Finally, good-hearted people should engage and help each other across national boundaries. By good-hearted people, I mean patriots with a global vision and understanding. Like realists, they defend their country's interests. But unlike realists, or offensive realists, they believe that their country's interests are tied up with those of others and are not necessarily in conflict with those of other countries. And many of their interests are the same. or at a fundamental level, they share a lot of common interests. And both their country and their people and the people of other countries can benefit if they cooperate on many issues. They should not allow the ideologues, ultra-nationalists, and racists in their own respective countries to shape the agenda and take hostage of the world. And they should not allow these people to take us down a path of mutual hatred and destruction. So good-hearted people of the world should unite. Let me stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So the floor is open. Thank you for the candid remarks.
Sure, thank you.
You can put your
Sure.
Go ahead first.
All right.
So your first recommendation for reforming the liberal order, more inclusive, give greater voice to non-ethnic countries. I think in principle, that's something that most people would be on board with. But it comes down to ultimately the sort of concrete matters of implementation. So how exactly should that be implemented?
Well, we have been talking about the contributions to IMF. We have a quota as to how much you can invest, and then how much voice you can have. Probably that can be done in proportion of the size of the GDP, not all. I mean, that's the primary probably the size of the GDP is a better measurement. And also, countries should welcome to get involved in multilateral cooperation rather than being excluded. I think CPTPP, for example, should be open to other countries, and maybe even G7 or G8, and I think BRICS can be open. We should not make institutions exclusive. And if they are interested, they should be welcome. I mean, countries should be welcome to join and get involved. We should not create a situation in which countries feel that they are the other country. There are many ways to be more tolerant and more inclusive, depending on which specific issue. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you for being here today. I have a question regarding the difference of policy between Europe and the USA. Right now, Europe isn't as aggressive as the United States against China. Do you think that policy would change in the future? And do you think that they would align more with the United States on their stances?
I think there is always a time lag between the European response to China and the US response to China. US tend to take the first step, and Europe would be 1 or 2 steps behind. In the recent round, US has become more critical of China first, and then Europe becomes more critical of China later. And I think the trend is likely to continue for a while because of the dynamics between China and the US, and also between China and Europe. There are many reasons for that, many factors involved. One is the disenchantment on the part of the engagement people in the US. They are disenchanted about the result of the engagement policy. They thought through engagement, China will become more like the US. Right? And then in recent years, they found that China is not becoming more like the US, but becoming less like the US. And they are worried. They think that their policy has failed. And also, both China and the US have become more ideological in their approach to each other for very different reasons. For the US, there is a real concern about American democracy. So Trump's big effort is to restore American faith in American democracy. So that's why I emphasize on theology. And also on international relations, the Biden effort is to restore American allies' faith in American democracy. There is a spillover. And the spillover on China-US relations is that the Biden administration has taken a more ideological approach in handling China-US relations, using a lot of ideological language in first China. On the Chinese side, probably the Chinese government thought that it's time to emphasize or put greater emphasis on ideology to enhance the authority of the Communist Party and also to make sure that things get done. So there is an effort to push in that direction. As I just mentioned, if we let ideology to define the relationship, then it becomes difficult to manage. Why? Because identity thing, ideology, there is no room for compromise. It's black and white. But the reality of it is great, it's complicated. But if you ideologicalize the relationship, then it becomes very difficult to handle. If you handle the relationship as it is, then we can always find rooms that manage conflicts and also to promote cooperation. So there are many reasons for the deterioration of the relations between China and the US. And to various kinds of extent, that also applies to the deterioration of relations between China and Europe. Because Europe shares the ideological approach on China. And they also feel disappointed that China has not developed in the way they have expected. But of course, Chinese should have its own right to feel disappointed that the US has not developed or Europe has not developed in the way the Chinese have expected. But that's another issue. But anyway, I don't know whether I answered your question. Your question is very difficult to answer. Yes.
Hi, thank you so much for coming to speak with us. I was interested in your thoughts on, you mentioned about the Taiwan problem. So you had mentioned that it's sort of unnecessary for the US to engage in further talks with Taiwan to send official representatives over to hold talks. So in the sort of hypothetical example where the US wasn't involved, from a Chinese perspective, what would be the ideal for cross-strait relations? Would it be a return to interactions under like the KMT, under Ma Ying-jeou? Would it be, and is that even possible under the DPP, and what would that look like?
Well, for the Chinese, at least in the short run, the ideal relations across the Taiwan Strait is peaceful development in the direction of eventual reunification. That's the ideal. But in recent years, you have the DPP in power. The PPP it wants to have independence. In other words, separate Taiwan away from China. Most Chinese are opposed to it. So Chinese government is very worried about it. And then you have the US trying to support Taiwan. Because from the US perspective, the gap between, in terms of military capabilities and economic capabilities across the Taiwan Strait has increased so much in favor of the mainland. So the US is worried that Taiwan may be forced to surrender to the mainland or to take extreme actions to become independent. Drag the US into a military war, into a conflict, military conflict with China. So it provided support to Taiwan in terms of weapons, in terms of political support to Taiwan's efforts to reach out to the outside world, more international influence, and also to send senior level officials to Taiwan. What the US has started is following up the US commitment to China when we developed, normalized our relationship. We established diplomatic relations. At that time, US agreed to abolish the mutual defense treaty with Taiwan, to withdraw US forces from Taiwan, and also to sever diplomatic relations. In other words, official relations with Taiwan. And China made a sort of implicit commitment to have peaceful reunification rather than forceful liberation of Taiwan. But over the years, China has honored its own part of the bargain. The US has been changing over time. So you have official contact renewed and become at higher level. And then you have the weapons sales at a larger quantity and quality, higher quality. And then you have US military personnel sent to Taiwan to train the US forces, military forces. So to China, the political basis for diplomatic relations between our two countries has been undermined. And that's not good, because China would not let Taiwan to be independent without a fight. Because most people, probably 99.9% of the Chinese people would not let their government to let Taiwan go. Whoever let Taiwan go would become a sort of, they say, historical culprit. So under the circumstances, it's very dangerous to take this approach of Taiwan. I just hope that Americans can understand this. word? Yes. Oh, sorry.
Okay, sure. Thank you for your comment. So I wanted to pick up on your point about sort of the pro-engagement crowd in the US becoming disenchanted over time. And another way to put this is there's sort of two types in DC, right? There's the people who think China is a government, the Chinese government is a government we can work with, we can become a responsible stakeholder, and then there's sort of the China hawk, China threat crowd. And in your remarks, you pointed for a lot of the reasons why the China hawk narrative is dominating the US today. But one aspect you left out was really domestic politics in China itself. And Susan Shirk has a good book that just came out about overreach. And this is a sensitive line of questioning. And so I understand I'm putting you on the spot. But from my point of view, a lot of the reaction is to Xi Jinping himself and the direction China has taken in the last 10 years. And as someone who I consider myself kind of a pro-engagement type person, but it's more and more difficult to make that argument when you see human rights abuses in Xinjiang, the increasing repression, the erosion of systems in Hong Kong, and on and on and on and on. So to what extent is there a conversation in Beijing still that recognizes the fact that a lot of the reaction in the West has to do with the direction China is taking? And is there anybody willing to point out this trend?
I think in China we say, "Eagle bottom Texas." So one hand cannot produce a collapse. So there are interactions in the country. I think the U.S. has never been happy with what's going on in China. Has complaints all the time. It says China has a problem with the U.S. on many issues. China's actions are part of this process. As to which aspect is contributing what, I think that needs to be discussed in greater detail, studied. But personally, I believe that probably we should take a more balanced view of what's going on in the other countries. First of all, what has happened in China in the past 10 years? Even from the American perspective, there are some positives that have never been paid attention to. First, anti-corruption campaign. People pay attention to the negative side. That is to get rid of the political opponents, that sort of thing. But it has made China less corrupt, and Chinese more doing things, more following the rules. So the positive side has often been ignored. And also, the China launched this anti-poverty during the past few years or 4 years. They claim that it has eliminated the absolute poverty in China within 3 years. The degree of success depends on where you draw the line and how you come up with the statistics. But it was a great effort. My school was assigned a job to help a certain township, and we worked hard at it. You can question the efficiency of this approach, but then this is one of the biggest challenges of humanity at the moment. How to address the question of polarization. So it deserves some positive comment, no positive comment. And also, in terms of the environment, China has done a lot in the past 10 years to clean up the environment. Beijing's air used to be so polluted. It was extremely unhealthy. And then within a short period of time, it's clean. Of course, at a great price. A lot of people suffered in the process. Again, you can question the methods of doing it. On Xinjiang, I think there is too much. I think it's a gigantic effort to combat terrorism. Before they took the actions, Xinjiang was plagued with terrorist incidents. A lot of people got killed, and many people got wounded. And many people lived in fear. And after 3 years of campaign, they eliminated the terrorist attacks. So for the past 4 or 5 years, there was no new terrorist incidents. The process has a lot of problems. It's a big, gigantic campaign. Human rights can be compromised. Even the other countries who are engaged in fighting a terrorist war, will restrict people's personal freedom to various extent. In the Chinese case, probably at a grander scale. But to say it is a genocide, that's too much. I hear a lot of grievances about how things were handled. People are not happy about it because their personal freedoms have been taken away. But if you balance with the result, now Xinjiang is stable. People are not fearing another terrorist attack. And the economy has been recovered. I don't know how to balance this. Whether the process is too harsh, too bad, and then the result doesn't worth it, or whether the result justifies the means to some extent. I don't know. U.S. has been fighting terrorism, not only at home but also overseas. Look at Afghanistan. We fought there for 20 years, probably out of the best intentions. But what kind of result? You fight for 20 years. You use so much resources, and then you found the situation has not improved. And you decide to do it. Why the cost is prohibitive? And you are not getting it. Is that a better alternative for Xinjiang? I don't know. I just raised it for us to think about. So I was thinking, I think the security is still tight, but then it's quite peaceful and orderly, and some people say it's much better than other ones. Who knows? Maybe we should encourage. I think Chinese government encourage more people to go to Xinjiang to see the results rather than very sensitive. Yes, please.
Thank you. My question is a little bit going to a tangent, and it's about the so-called Thucydides trap.
Yes.
Now, I would have two questions for this. The first one is that from what's happening, is the United States taking steps, make one thing, it's exactly walk the path. And similarly for the Chinese. The Chinese are doing that also walking the path toward the track. And my second question is, again, from the Chinese perspective, or not perspective, from the perspective of Chinese history and the philosophy of political theory, is there such a thing of conflict between a rising power and a setting power? Inevitable.
Well, I think realism is not only a Western tradition, but also a Chinese tradition. You have people who subscribe to this kind of perspective, both in China and also in the West. Here you have hawkish people, like offensive realists, who believe that China is only has power and will challenge the US and put the US down. So the only way to deal with this kind of situation is to put it down sooner than later, no matter what. And a conflict is inevitable for them. In China, you have people who also believe, who echo this kind of sentiment. They also believe that the existing trap is real. And they also believe that whatever the US does is about to put China down out of its own interest. But I think this kind of view is very misleading. Because first of all, the history is not like that. Or at least it's not just like that. You know, Professor Graham Allison, he examined a lot of cases in history and found that it's more likely to be true than not. But then if you look at the cases examined, there are many exceptions to the rule. First of all, when Germany challenged Britain, Germany was, well, rising, but it was a third-rate power. The second one was the United States. Well, actually, the first challenger was the United States. But Britain, instead of paying attention to the US, it decided to contain Germany. Then the argument has two problems. One is you cannot explain the US, the British, treatment of the US. The second is that you cannot explain British treatment of Germany. At the moment, the US is facing the rise of China and also the rise of India. Would the US contain India first? I mean, it doesn't make sense, right? Maybe the British were not thinking right at the time. But it should have contained the US, right? If the theory is right. Apparently, the theory has a problem. The theory also has a problem to explain the re-emergence of Germany and Japan after the World War II. The US never thought about using force to contain Germany and Japan when they rose again. There may be instances in which the rising powers are challenged by the existing powers are challenged by the rising power, and they have a war. But there are also a lot of other instances in which this did not happen. But that does not matter that much because people seem to believe in this stuff. The logic is very simple, and then they say, "Well, history demonstrates that," and then they have a lot of following, not only among the people but also among the officials in different countries. That's a problem. That's why I say that we should not let these people who take hostage because history did not happen that way, and also because it should not happen. Relations between countries are far more complicated than the simplistic logic of the offensive years.
I'm going to keep asking questions here.
Yes, please.
So thank you. I wanted to ask you a question about globalization and your interpretation of globalization. In your first answer to Kyle's question, you talked about the quota reform. In 2009, after the London G20 summit, there was a big discussion of expanding the quotas and changing them. But what really was produced was almost nothing. It was a kind of nothing back. And I wondered whether you believed that the consequence of that failure in 2009 was to push the People's Republic, and particularly under President Xi, to think of some alternative globalization, so that the Belt and Road Initiative is constructed as an alternative to a failed attempt to re-multilateralize the world in 2009 and 2010.
Yeah, that's a very interesting time. And it was taken over by its foreign policy. But I think China certainly got frustrated, disappointed. But at the same time, I don't think that was enough for China to change its line of engagement in the rest of the world, and also change the nature of China's engagement with the rest of the world. But China was thinking of, for example, the AIIB. It was sort of not an alternative. The West-dominated international order institutions, but it's a sort of addition to it. Okay, you know, China wants to have a multilateral bank, investment bank, and China finds that there is this possibility, and China tried to galvanize other countries' support. And in the process of getting other countries' support, you begin to reflect on all kinds of issues, including things like, if you want to secure other countries' support, you have to respect other countries' wishes, right? In the end, you find AIIB more like the World Bank and other international financial institutions than like you know, something totally different, something very different. So China has been growing in terms of what it can do multilaterally in this world. Okay. And if the West does right, they can, you know, somehow accommodate each other and find ways to work together. But unfortunately, well, on the question of AIIB, you know, Britain and other European countries joined, and it turned out to be a big surprise in a positive way for them. I remember at the end of the Obama administration, I talked to American officials. Some of them were regretting that the US took the decision not to endorse it, because they had not anticipated that things would go that way. There was too much suspicion. But later on the question of Belt and Road Initiative, I think originally it was sort of a way to to change, well, make China's economic growth more sustainable. In other words, certain part of China has developed to the extent that it has excessive capital, technology, and managerial skills, or attractive managerial skills. So unlike in the earlier days, China's policy of openness was to attract foreign capital, technology, and managerial skills. Now China can also export these things. And one way to do it is to export to the less developed part of China. That Chinese government has been promoting. The other is to export to the outside world. And the Belt and Road Initiative, I think at least some people in China was conceived by them as a way to adapt to the new situation for China. But then it was complete. Well, there are many rules for the outside world to accommodate this and to take advantage of this. But unfortunately, nothing happened. Actually, the Japanese government tried to take advantage of this. They had agreement with China. They had their own initiative, like Indo-Pacific, some kind of framework. So they say that okay, we can work together on the overlapping areas. So they say it's Indo-Pacific initiative. We say it's Belt and Road initiative. So we can cooperate on this. But unfortunately, the US did not take this. And this became one of the problems between China and the US later on. Yeah. Thank you.
Can I ask a question and we'll throw it to Julia? My question is, what are the lessons that Beijing is drawing from Ukraine? Ukraine is an open, relatively democratic society on the edge of a great power that is resisting being drawn into Russia's orbit. And they've resisted, and they generated great international support. What lessons in Beijing are being drawn about Russia, about democratic resistance to use of coercion? What might be now the prevailing view in Beijing about Taiwan that maybe wasn't a year ago?
Well, I would say that it would be unfair to say that China has not learned anything. But different Chinese draw different lessons from this experience. Some Chinese believe that Russia made a big mistake because they failed to calculate the cost, especially it failed to consider its strength, its own strength. It does not have sufficient capabilities to do the job. That's one reflection. Another reflection is, it's extremely costly, and it's counterproductive. You forced to address such kind of a problem. However, agreements you have about however just your agreements is, Russia used to be part of Ukraine, especially the eastern part of Ukraine used to belong to Russia, in recent history. So they had sort of a justification from the Russian perspective, nostalgic of the old times. That's understandable. But then to use force to address such kind of agreements, counterproductive. It's counterproductive. And of course, there are others, thinking about the military operations. Some would say that, okay, the West has been shoring up the Ukraine, but this should not apply to Taiwan. Taiwan is an island. Not easy to smuggle weapons to Taiwan. Ukraine is different. You can smuggle tanks weapons to Ukraine much more easily than to Taiwan. So what kind of implications for China's policy on Taiwan or China's approach to Taiwan? I don't know, it's very hard to say. There are people who think that maybe, it shows that it's very costly. And other people, they say that, oh, we can do a better job within a much shorter time and deal with the situation in a much more effective way. I don't know. I think it's a very complicated situation. China has been, I would say that in theory, China is opposed to the type of actions taken by Russia. As I just mentioned, no country from Chinese perspective should have the right to incite a certain group of residents within another country to separate the piece of land on which they live away from that country. And this is China's principle, and it's China's interest to defend this principle. The reason that China has not, that explains the reason China has not gone all out for Russia. But China has not taken a position to oppose Russia. Why? Because U.S. has put too much pressure on China. U.S. has taken China as if China is the enemy on many fronts. So and China-Russia relationship quite good. Why should we jeopardize our Russia? How U.S. under the circumstances? That's the logic. And also, remember after the World War I, and also after the World War II broke out, what was the U.S. policy? Neutrality, right? If you can practice neutrality policy, why can't China practice neutrality policy? Especially after the outbreak of the Second World War. The good side and evil side are very clear. Where was the morality of the US? Of staying out of the war and playing neutral? National interest, popular opinion. So China, too, they argue has the right to stay neutral. So don't try to push China. They say, pushing China, especially taking harsh positions to China, may make you regret more.
Thank you. Toya,
We have a question coming online.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you so much for your time and your talk. I'll be relatively brief. You mentioned up top that the current international order is becoming less liberal overall, and that this constitutes a threat to international peace and stability. I was wondering if you could share your thoughts on to what extent is this drive towards illiberalism in the international order being driven by the growing footprint of illiberal states, including China, in global governance. For example, China's refusal to condemn Russia's invasion at the UN, and politicizing World Health Organization investigations into the origins of COVID-19. And sort of, how do you see the growing role of illiberal states within the international order as being the driving force behind this overall trend of illiberalism? Thank you.
Well, thank you for the question. The big one. I would say that China, the international order has become less liberal, but not more illiberal, not necessarily more illiberal. This current international order was established in the wake of the World War II. This order has been interpreted very differently by countries under the order. The Western countries, especially in later years, try to explain interpret it as a sort of liberal, emphasize the liberal aspect of the international order. And many other countries regard this international order from a secular perspective. That is, it's not about values, Western values. It's about universal values, such as sovereignty, territorial integrity, no use of force, maybe multilateral cooperation, that sort of thing. So, in the wake of the end of the Cold War, the West power reached its zenith, the peak, and the Western liberal international order, the Western interpretation of the international order prevailed. So at that time, you hear people talking about human rights before sovereignty rights. All the old norms, values were outdated. Territorial integrity, sovereignty, and all these things. And also some people believe that the liberal countries can have legitimacy of using force against illiberal countries. And then we had the Kosovo intervention. But then, over time, the situation has changed. Just mentioned, the Western power has not doing very well, except the US and maybe a few others. But as a collective, its share of the world GDP has declined dramatically. Also, domestic, political, very divisive, and other factors involved. So it has been its ability to impose or to uphold the more liberal interpretation of international order has declined. And then we left with more emphasis on, especially with the so-called rise of the East, more emphasis on the secular interpretation of international order. What Russia did, and maybe some other countries did, is to undermine even the secular international order. That's secular interpretation of international order. That is sovereignty, territorial integrity, no use of force to settle disputes in countries, and that sort of thing. So that's why I say the international order has become less liberal and even less stable in a secular sense. Unfortunately, this trend is likely to continue in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Another question? Coming to the end, so fairly brief exchange as possible. Connie?
Yeah. So you mentioned that the deterioration of tensions between US and China is, I guess, in part due to the US refusal to be open and collaborate with China. But I'm wondering, like, on the flip side, do you think China's the same? Or do you think China's more open-minded? And do you think China's doing anything actively to pursue engagement? And if so, like what?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's very interesting that Professor Susan Shirk wrote a book about overreach, overreact, right? And basically, he argues that China has overreached, US and the US has overreacted. So if you put the question in that kind of framework, US is reacting, or has been reacting to what China does. But if you look at Chinese rhetoric, Chinese studies, they think the US has taken actions. China has been reacting. Why has the relationship ended up this way? If you follow the Chinese diplomats and officials rhetoric, it's because the US has done this, the US has done that. I think probably the truth is somewhere in between. We all reacted to some extent. Probably we can do better in other aspects. But since the US is on the stronger side, probably the US has to bear more responsibilities in shaping the world. Yes.
Thank you. We have a reception outside, so we're going to have just a few more quick exchanges and we're headed out. So quick question, we'll take two and then we'll let you wrap it up.
Dr. Jia, thank you for your comments. I find your perspective on these issues fascinating. Now, obviously, you're an academic, but you have some planners think about these issues as well. I'm curious to know from your perspective, do you think China now sees itself as a hegemon? And actually, I don't use that term in any way derogatory way. It's more in a sense of, a sense of influence and responsibility, be it regional or global.
And just one last question, and then we'll let you put them together.
Yeah, thank you for your comments. I guess I'm curious about how, I feel like the conversation that we've been having is very much state to state level, and I'm kind of curious about the people dimension within this as well. And I'm wondering, in your view, how do we, I guess from the China side, how might China tell a more compelling story in terms of public engagement? The audience is not just states around the world, but also. And we think.
Thank you.
Okay. How does China see itself? That's a big question. Actually, it's perplexing to China, the Chinese. I recently have been, in recent years, I've been arguing that China is rising China, not a risen China. A rising China is different from China before its rise, and it's different from China after its rise. It's somewhere in between. So China today has dual identities on many fronts. For example, China is a developing country, it's a developed one. It's a weak country, it's a strong one. It's a poor country, it's a rich one, and also an ordinary country, and also a superpower or hegemon. And identities define interests. China has two sets of interests on many issues. For example, on climate change, as a developing country, China shares on climate change. So it has a impulse to resist the signing of binding agreements to cut emissions because China needs development. But China is also a developed country. If you look at Hong Kong, if you look at Shanghai, Shenzhen, and Beijing, these are developed places. People there have a very different take on this. They have different interests. They care about air quality. They care about health, safety. So they put a lot of pressure on Chinese government. So according between the Chinese government, facing the climate change problem and also pollution problem, sometimes they behave quite differently on the same issue, in contradiction. Remember when Premier Wen Jiabao went to Copenhagen, the climate change summit, his job was to defend China's interests, as a developing country. He refused to sign any binding agreement. But before he went and after he left, and he came back to China, he was a very active leader to push for cutting emissions. So very, self-contradiction. This occurs throughout China's behavior. So whether China regards itself as hegemon or not, some people do regard China as a hegemon, some people do not. And also some people regard China as a hegemon at this time, but not at other times. That's the problem we are facing. Part of the problem we are facing when it comes to China. Finally, your question, I think you would explain are very important. I've been a strong advocate for this. I wrote proposals at the CPTCC National Meeting, which is a sort of Senate of the US, but without legislative power and without that much influence. Basically, I argue that we should let our experts and scholars to talk to their counterparts, to talk to journalists, and to talk to diplomats, to learn. This is one way to tell the Chinese story and also to learn about other people's views, perceptions, and understand the realities of other countries. And that's very important for China to make realistic policies that would serve China's interests as well as others. So, and of course, this is only one aspect of people exchange, of the function of people exchange. I think there are many other aspects to it. And I think this is a very important thing we should all try to encourage rather than restrict. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, this has been just a fascinating and enjoyable event, not always uplifting. You've given us some bad news as well as good news. So, but it's been honest and candid and engaging. So thank you very much, Professor Jia. And just one little gift for you from Princeton. And we look forward to continuing the exchange because as you definitely argued eloquently, we need to keep talking. So thank you very much. And can you join